Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Zola. So what Zola is essentially about is basically it is based off of a 148 tweet Twitter thread, and basically we center on Zola. She is this waitress and she comes upon this character Stephanie, who is a stripper. These two eventually end up getting really close, and Stephanie one day decides that she is going to go on this road trip with Zola, where basically she's going to get her to strip as well, just for what Zola thinks is going to be some extra cash. But very quickly when they go on this road trip, Zola realizes there is a lot more going on than she ultimately expected, and this really kind of questions her friendship with Stephanie overall. So Zola, I was definitely really looking forward to this movie. Look, I mean, anytime an A24 movie comes out, I get really excited, but also just the idea that this is a film that's based off of a really well-known Twitter thread, of which I was not really that well aware of until this movie, that had me really excited because it seemed like this was going to be something really different. Maybe they could, use that thread and kind of tell its own story and really kind of show how much, film has evolved in the sense of what you can really do in terms of telling stories. So I really thought this film could be something really fun. It looked like it was going to be a lot of fun, but it also looked like maybe it had a little bit more to it than expected. And I have to say, while Zola is definitely a very entertaining romp, it unfortunately is a film that doesn't really have that much else beneath the surface, and I think is a case of relying a little too heavily on its source material than it really does ultimately need to. But we are just getting into right now, starting off with the cast. And by far, that is the best thing about this entire movie. If the cast was not as good as they are, I don't really think this movie would be as enjoyable as it is, because I think everyone really does a great job in this film. Let's first talk about Taylour Paige, who of course plays our lead character. I've not really seen her in much before. I know she's had a couple smaller roles, like say in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and she did a good job for what she had here, but I feel like in this film, she really gets to showcase her true range and her true potential as an actress, and really does a great job here, playing a character that is very much an observer, but one that you really do find yourself drawn to. The way that she reacts to certain things, I mean, she is so fun to watch. There are many moments where she had me laughing throughout this film, but she also is a character that you're very fascinated by, and I think Paige overall, she has a lot to work with in this film, and I really liked what she ended up doing here, and I think if there's anything this film succeeds at, it really is just showing how talented of an actress Paige really is. And I really do hope after this film, she's able to acquire a lot more roles, because she does have a lot of range in her, and I really like what she ended up doing in this film. But Riley Keough, I mean, this is one of those actresses that has really just proved herself to be a great character actress, and especially after this film, I think really proves herself as such, because she really transforms into this character of Stephanie, who really is just like this trash white woman. She's, doing the most ridiculous shit. There's a lot of stuff she's doing that you can't believe that she's involving herself in, but I think Keough really embraces this character overall. She really embraces just how eccentric and weird this character is, and I really like what she ended up doing. Yes, this character can be very obnoxious, but she's supposed to be, and I think that's something that Keough just did a really good job with. I really appreciated her role throughout this movie. I thought that she was so much fun to watch, and these two have really good chemistry. They bounce off of each other really nicely. I liked the bond that these two ultimately end up forming, and I think they did a really good job throughout this film. The rest of the cast also does do a really strong job. Colman Domingo, man, I mean, he is one of those actors where anytime he pops up into a movie, he's probably gonna be one of the standout performances, and here, I mean, this is probably one of his most impressive roles yet. He plays this character of X, and we don't really know a lot about him, but as the film goes on, we start to realize that there's a lot more. He seems like this guy that He's charming. He seems like he's someone that is, really gonna be this good friend to Zola, but you realize that there's a more vindictive and more violent side to him that he starts to show, and he does a really great job of balancing this character. This is a very complex character. I can't really get into it all that much, but I really liked what he ended up doing here. He was funny, but he was also kind of terrifying, and I really liked what he ended up doing in this film. I think Domingo just continues to show how great of an actor he really is. And Nicholas Braun as well. Haven't really seen him in much because I haven't watched a lot of Succession, but I hear he's great in that. He's great here. He plays Stephanie's boyfriend, and he is someone that is just very erratic, and he's always seems to be very, stressed, and his character I thought was just a lot of fun to watch. Really, everyone does a great job in here acting-wise. I think that probably is the best thing about this movie. There are a lot of things here that kind of underwhelm me about this film, but the acting is definitely not one of them. Now let's get into the directing and the writing, because here's where we get to the stuff where I think the film doesn't work quite as well as it should. Janicza Bravo's directing, I do think, is really good here. She does a good job of not ever taking this too seriously. She realizes that this is kind of silly. The whole story that's going on here, it's a bit ridiculous. It's something that at points you're like, no, there's no way that this actually did happen. And I think she really embraces just the ridiculousness of this story. And I did overall enjoy her directing here. And she gives it this very sort of quirky style. At points, the film almost feels like a fairy tale. Like you're watching this and you feel like you're just listening to some sort of fairy tale that hasn't happened before. And I think Bravo does a really good job of making it feel, like I said, very fantastical in that way, but also reminding us that this did actually happen and finding a way to still ground it in reality. And I really did enjoy her style throughout this film. The film at points is really funny, but then there are points where the film does get really dark, and I think she did balance it quite well overall, and I really did enjoy her directing throughout this film. That being said, I don't think this film utilized her directing quite as well as it really could have. I think she has a really strong style, but I think what ultimately brings this movie down, and this is really where we get to my main problem with this film, is that I think the film is just a little too focused on trying to be as faithful to that original Twitter thread as it really was. Because aside from the original thread, there really isn't a lot to this movie in terms of the story, and I think that's what really did ultimately bring this movie down for me, because I do want to say, this film is very entertaining to watch. I was never bored by this movie. I was laughing quite a bit at all of these, ridiculous situations that went down. But I kept watching this movie thinking that this was going to lead to something really big, that there was going to be a little bit more to it. And the whole time, it just felt like I was being told events. I was just watching a series of events happen. And I think ultimately that's what does bring this movie down. I think there's a lot of really fun ideas that happen here. This sort of road trip that Zola is sort of swindled into, it's ridiculous what ends up happening. The things that happen in this film, you can't believe actually did take place. And I think the film does do a good job with that, but I think there's even more that it could have done. When it comes to her relationship with Stephanie, it's not that the film doesn't give it focus, because it does. You understand that there are cracks that are forming early on, and eventually it's going to lead these two to fall out. The film, from the beginning, tells you that these two fell out and that there's something that caused it, and you're just kind of waiting to see what that is. But I think what ultimately hurts the movie is that we never really shift from Zola's perspective as much as I really would have wanted the film to. The film is so narrowly focused on this is how Zola saw this situation that you're not entirely sure if it actually happened in the way that it did. And I didn't realize this was an issue until about, I want to say, an hour into the film suddenly shifts perspective. We get to see Stephanie's perspective on the situation, and it's completely different from what we've been told. And I like the idea that, we're kind of dealing with an unreliable narrator here, and we're not entirely sure which perspective is the true one. But I think the film could have maybe played around with the perspective a little bit more than it really did. I would have liked it if we got to see some of the other characters' perspectives on things. And again, I understand it also, but the problem is it also feels like the only reason they added Keough's perspective is because the real woman that Keough is portraying also put out this Twitter thread, and the film felt like they needed to shed light on that. And I like the fact that they did, but I just wish that they could have used this thread as a starting point. They really could have done a better job at fleshing out some of what was going on. Use what you saw as a starting point. Use it as just a list of things you want to happen, but then construct your own narrative. And I don't really feel like this film did that in the way that I really wanted them to. Perfect example of that is the character of Stephanie, who there's a lot more going on with her than beyond the surface. We know that she is a stripper, but there's a lot of stuff that she has gotten herself involved in, and we see that it actually really does affect her relationship with Nicholas Braun's character. He doesn't really approve of a lot of what she's doing, and there's a lot of friction between these two, and there's a point where something happens in the film, and it's played for laughs. And I don't have a problem with it being played for laughs because it was actually really funny. But the problem is, the second that this thing happens, we never go back to it. It just kind of happens, and the film just moves on after that. And I think that was the wrong choice for this film. I think we could have focused a lot more on this particular, relationship, the struggle that these two are having in their relationship. I think it would have made the film a lot more interesting, but also contrast that with Zola's relationship with her boyfriend, who doesn't really feel like he has much to do in this film. We see him in the beginning, and it seems like these two have a loving relationship, and there are a couple points where he'll call in here and there to see how she's doing, but other than that, they don't really do much of anything with him, and that was disappointing to me. I felt like there's more that they could have done. And going back to Zola, my other issue with this movie is because the film is so focused on this event, Zola doesn't really feel like a character. She just kind of feels like the audience. She's watching everything go down, but we never really get to see her reaction to these events. We never really get to see, how is this affecting her? We see what she tells us, but we don't really get to see what happens from there. And I just never really felt like, I think what I'm really trying to say is that I felt like because the film was so faithful to these characters, I never really felt like I got to truly live in the moment with them. Never really got a chance to see who they are aside from just this Twitter thread. And I think that's what bothered me, because I really did end up enjoying all of these characters. I thought they were all a lot of fun. They're a wacky bunch for sure, but they're a really fun bunch to watch, and that's something that I did really appreciate, is that this film really does go for it in terms of the wackiness, especially in the third act. I mean, it really went in a crazy direction that I was not expecting it to at all, but ultimately, I just think there's more that they could have done with it writing-wise, and I think that's what does bring this film down overall. The cinematography, I think, is really good here. There are a lot of sequences, especially early on when you're first seeing, Stephanie and Zola in the strip club. There's a lot of cool stuff they do there. Some of the running motifs they do as well. That's something that I definitely really did enjoy. And the score, I really did like the score to this movie a lot. It was simplistic, but I think it really worked for what they were ultimately going for. And my other issue with this movie, though, is that I do think it is too short. The movie is only 90 minutes long, and I think it could have been a little bit longer. I think if we had a little bit more time to really flesh out all of these characters, I think this really could have been something worthwhile. And again, use that Twitter thread as a starting point. Don't use it as the basis of your film. Don't use it as basically the script. Use it as a starting point. But even at that, even though the film is so faithful to that Twitter thread, the way that this movie ends is so abrupt, and I was so confused that I actually looked back at that Twitter thread to see, was it that faithful? And actually the way that the thread ends is more satisfying than the way the movie ended. The movie just kind of ended, and I don't understand why they decided to end it in such an abrupt fashion. It felt like they didn't really want to go the extra mile and really tell this story. They just wanted to kind of do a Cliff Notes version of it, and I think that's what ultimately did hurt this movie for me. And when we get to the ending of this movie, like I said, while I really was taken aback by just how far the movie went in terms of the chaotic nature of it, I really found myself wanting more. I figured that there was going to be more happening, and it just is one of those films that just kind of ends, and I found myself very disappointed by that. I felt like there was more that they could have delved into. I felt like there were more arcs that they could have fleshed out, but unfortunately, a lot of that just did not feel as well utilized as I think it ultimately could have to make a more satisfying experience. Zola is a film that definitely is very entertaining. It has some really strong performances. It does have some really good ideas in there when it comes to the idea of lust, when it comes to the idea of something really risky, putting yourself in this industry, but it really doesn't have a lot to say. It doesn't really do as much with its characters as it should have, and overall, while it is definitely very entertaining, it's a fun ride, it doesn't really feel as memorable as I think it really should be. This feels more like just a forgettable excursion more than anything. I think the experience, if they had more ideas to be fully utilized and they could have fleshed out these characters more, I think the experience overall would have been a lot more satisfying and a lot more memorable. But unfortunately, this film, I just don't think is one that is overall going to stick with me at the end of the day. So overall, while there was a lot I did enjoy about Zola, this film just didn't fully come together for me in the way that I overall wanted it to. So I am going to give it overall a C+. Oh no, not me forgetting to do the outro again. But anyways, guys, that's it for my review of Zola. Let me know if you guys saw this movie overall, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye. Moving on.